Good evening, dear traveler. Tonight, we journey to the rugged northern coast of medieval England, where towering cliffs stand against the restless sea, and a lonely lighthouse keeps its silent watch over the waves. This is not a story of kings or great battles. It is the quiet tale of an ordinary man whose life became intertwined with one of the sea's oldest mysteries. So, settle comfortably beneath your blanket, allow your breathing to slow, and let the sound of the waves carry you gently into another century. Nearly 700 years ago, on a remote stretch of England's northern coastline, stood Blackstone Lighthouse. It was not the tallest lighthouse in the kingdom, nor the most famous. Its walls were built from rough grey stone that had endured countless winters. Salt from the sea had
covered every stone, and strong winds sang to the narrow windows day and night. The lighthouse stood alone. To the east stretched the endless North Sea. To the west lay rolling green hills, scattered farms, and a small fishing village whose people had depended on the lighthouse for generations. Its keeper was a quiet man named Thomas Ashcroft. Thomas was 63 years old. His beard had turned the color of fresh snow, and deep lines marked the corners of his eyes. Those lines had not been carved by sorrow alone, but by decades of smiling at strangers, watching sunrises over the sea, and facing storms that would have frightened younger men. For more than 40 years, Thomas had lived the same peaceful routine. He woke before dawn. He swept the stone floors. He polished the great glass lenses that magnified the lighthouse's flame. He carried heavy barrels of whale oil up the winding staircase, one careful step at a time. Every evening, just before sunset, he climbed the final steps to the lantern room. With practiced hands, he trimmed the wick, cleaned the chimney glass, and lit the great beacon. As darkness spread across the sea, the warm golden light reached miles into the night. Far away, sailors searching through rain or fog would lift their eyes with relief. "There it is," they often whispered. Blackstone. For them, the lighthouse meant safety. For Thomas, it meant purpose. He had never married. He had never left the coast for more than a few days. Some villagers thought his life must be lonely, but Thomas never felt alone. The sea was always changing. Every sunrise painted the horizon with different colors. Every storm told a different story. Every tide carried whispers from distant lands. To Thomas, the ocean was like an old friend who never stopped speaking. Each evening after lighting the beacon, he sat beside the window with a warm cup of tea and an old leather journal. Inside its pages, he recorded everything he noticed: the direction of the wind, the height of the waves, the arrival of seabirds, the brightness of the stars. He believed that every small detail mattered. Nature always leaves clues, his father had once told him. You simply have to learn how to notice them. Thomas never forgot those words. One quiet autumn morning, while walking along the rocky beach after a violent storm, he discovered something unusual. Half buried beneath what sand lay an old wooden chest. Its iron hinges were covered with rust. Seaweed clung to its sides. It looked as though it had drifted across the ocean for many years. Curious, Thomas carefully pulled it free. The chest was surprisingly light. He carried it back to the lighthouse and placed it beside the fireplace. Using an old iron tool, he gently lifted the broken lid. Inside, there was no treasure, no gold, no silver, only 3 objects: an ancient brass compass, a folded piece of faded parchment, and a small carved wooden ship no larger than the palm of his hand. Thomas picked up the compass first. It was beautifully crafted. Tiny symbols surrounded its edge. They did not resemble any language he had ever seen. The glass was scratched with age, yet the needle still moved. Only, it did not point north. Instead, it slowly turned toward the sea. Thomas frowned. He walked around the room. The needle never changed direction, always toward the water. He smiled quietly. "Perhaps you've been at sea for too long," he whispered. The carved wooden ship was equally strange. Every sail had been carved with remarkable detail. Along its tiny hull appeared the same mysterious symbols engraved on the compass. Finally, Thomas unfolded the brittle parchment. Most of the writing had faded beyond recognition. Only one sentence remained clear: "Keep the light burning, even for those who cannot be seen. Thomas read the words again, and again. Something about them filled the room with an odd stillness. Outside, the wind had completely stopped. The sea, usually restless, had become perfectly calm. As evening approached, Thomas repaired the lighthouse as he always did. He climbed the spiral staircase, carrying fresh oil for the great lamp. He polished the enormous glass lenses until they sparkled. Then, as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, he lit the beacon. The familiar golden light spread across the darkening sea. Thomas stood at the balcony, watching the first stars appear above the water. Everything seemed peaceful until, far beyond the horizon, he noticed a single silver light. It was too steady to be a star, too low to be the moon, and far too bright to belong to any fishing boat. Thomas narrowed his eyes. The strange light slowly moved across the ocean. Then another appeared, and another. Within minutes, there were dozens, silent lights drifting across the sea, moving together, without a single sound. Thomas reached for his old brass telescope. As he looked through the lens, his heart skipped a beat. The lights were not floating. They belonged to ships. Beautiful ships with pale silver sails. Ships unlike any he had ever seen. And although the sea was calm, their sails moved as if caught by a wind that did not exist. Thomas lowered the telescope. He blinked once, then looked again. The ships were still there, sailing silently toward Blackstone Lighthouse. Thomas kept the telescope pressed against his eye. The strange ships remained exactly where they were. Their silver sails shimmered beneath the moonlight. Yet there was no wind to move them. The sea was unnaturally calm. Not even the smallest wave disturbed the water around them. For a long moment, Thomas wondered if exhaustion had begun to play tricks on his eyes. He lowered the telescope and rubbed them gently. When he looked again, the ships were closer, far closer. His heart beat a little faster. He counted them. 1, 5, 10, 20. More continued to emerge from the mist until he could no longer count them all. Every ship looked ancient. Their wooden hulls were dark with age. Their tall masts reached toward the stars. Yet something felt unusual. No lanterns burned upon their decks. No voices drifted across the sea. No captain stood at the wheel. No sailors adjusted the sails. The fleet moved in perfect silence. Thomas had spent more than 40 years watching ships cross these waters. Merchant vessels, fishing boats, Royal Navy ships. He knew the sounds of the sea better than most men knew their own homes. Every ship creaked. Every sail snapped in the wind. Every crew laughed, shouted, or sang. But these ships made no sound at all. Only the lighthouse beams swept gently across their silver sails. Without thinking, Thomas reached into his pocket and removed the old brass compass he had found that morning. The moment the lighthouse light touched the nearest ship, the compass became warm, not slightly warm, hot enough that Thomas almost dropped it. Its needle began spinning wildly, round and round, faster and faster, until suddenly it stopped. It pointed directly toward the leading ship. Thomas stared in amazement. Then a bell echoed across the sea. One slow chime, another, then a third. The sound was deep and gentle, as though carried from somewhere beyond the horizon. It seemed impossibly distant, yet strangely close. The fleet continued forward. As the first ship entered the lighthouse's golden beam, something extraordinary happened. For the briefest moment, Thomas thought he saw people standing upon its deck. Not clearly, only faint outlines. Men wearing long coats, women wrapped in heavy cloaks, children holding hands. Their forms shimmered like reflections upon still water. Then they vanished. Thomas blinked. The deck was empty once more. A cool breeze finally reached the cliffs. The lighthouse flame flickered softly. The compass grew cold again. Slowly, one by one, the silver ships passed through the lighthouse's beam and disappeared into the darkness beyond Blackstone Point. Within minutes, the sea was empty. Only moonlight remained. Thomas stood motionless until dawn. When the first rays of sunlight touched the cliffs, he climbed down the spiral staircase and opened his leather journal. His hand trembled slightly as he began to write. October 17th. Tonight, I witnessed a fleet unlike any vessel known to this world. They sail without sound, without crew, without fear. The strange compass responded to them as though it recognized old friends. Asterisk if anyone ever reads these pages. Know that I have written only what I truly saw. Asterisk. He closed the journal gently. For the first time in many years, Thomas felt that the sea was hiding a secret far older than the lighthouse itself. 2 days later, Thomas traveled to the nearby fishing village to buy lamp oil and fresh bread. The village was small. Only a handful of cottages stood around the harbor. Smoke drifted lazily from stone chimneys. Children chased one another along the shore, while fishermen repaired torn nets beneath the morning sun. Everyone knew Thomas. Everyone greeted him warmly. "The sea been kind to you, Thomas?" one fisherman asked. Thomas smiled. "Als kind das Efer." But he did not mention the silver ships. Some mysteries sounded unbelievable even to the person who had witnessed them. Before returning home, he visited the oldest resident of the village. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore. She had lived beside the sea for nearly 90 years. The villagers often joked that Eleanor remembered events even the history books had forgotten. Her cottage overlooked the cliffs. Bundles of dried herbs hung beside the windows. Ancient books filled every shelf. The room smelled of lavender, old paper, and burning oak. When Thomas showed her the compass, her smile disappeared. She looked at it for a very long time. Finally, she whispered, "I never thought I would see this again." Thomas leaned forward. "You know what it is?" She nodded slowly. "My grandfather spoke of it when I was a little girl." "What did he say?" Eleanor carefully placed the compass upon the table. They called it the Mariner's Heart. Thomas remained silent. "It is said," Eleanor continued softly, "that many centuries ago, a terrible storm destroyed an entire fleet near Blackstone Point. No one survived. The sea was so violent that even the strongest lighthouse could not save them." Thomas glanced toward the window. Outside, gentle waves rolled peacefully onto the shore. It was difficult to imagine such destruction. Eleanor continued. "After the storm, strange lights began appearing every autumn. Some believed they were ghosts. Others believed they were memories. My grandfather believed something different." "What?" "He believed that courage never disappears. It leaves echoes. And sometimes the sea remembers." Thomas looked once more at the compass. The tiny symbols carved around its edge suddenly seemed less mysterious, almost familiar. Before he left, Eleanor handed him a folded sheet of faded parchment. "I've kept this for nearly 60 years, she said. "It belongs with the compass." Thomas carefully unfolded it. It showed an old drawing of Blackstone Lighthouse. Around it sailed dozens of silver ships. At the bottom, written in beautiful ink, were the words, "As long as the light endures, no soul shall lose its way." Thomas thanked Eleanor and quietly began the long walk back toward the lighthouse. The autumn sun was sinking lower in the sky. The evening tide was already beginning to rise. And somewhere beyond the peaceful horizon, he could not shake the feeling that the silent fleet would soon return. Thomas stood silently in the lantern room, watching as the silver fleet drifted across the calm sea. The golden light of Blackstone Lighthouse stretched across the water. Beside it, the crystal lantern cast a soft silver glow. Together, the two lights formed a shining path that seemed to disappear into the horizon itself. The figures aboard the silent ships never spoke. Yet Thomas felt no fear. Instead, he felt a deep sense of peace. It was as if the sea itself had fallen asleep. The wind had vanished. The waves barely moved. Even the stars above seemed brighter than they had ever been before. One by one, the ships followed the glowing path. As each vessel reached the edge of the light, it slowly dissolved into thousands of tiny silver sparks. The sparks floated gently upward, joining the stars above. Soon, only one ship remained. It was larger than all the others. Its sails shimmered like moonlight on fresh snow. As it approached the lighthouse, Thomas noticed an elderly captain standing at its wheel. The captain wore a long navy blue coat with brass buttons faded by time. His silver beard moved gently in the sea breeze. Although many yards separated them, the captain removed his hat and bowed respectfully. Thomas instinctively returned the gesture. The old captain smiled. Then, without speaking aloud, Thomas somehow heard a voice inside his heart. Asterisk, thank you, keeper. Asterisk, the words were gentle, warm, filled with gratitude. For a brief moment, Thomas understood. These were not ghosts trapped upon the sea. They were memories. The memories of every sailor who had spent his final moments protecting others. Every captain who had refused to abandon his crew. Every navigator who had guided frightened passengers through terrible storms. History had forgotten many of their names, but the sea had not, and neither had the lighthouse. The final ship slowly entered the beam of light. The captain placed one hand over his heart. Then the vessel became brighter, brighter still, until it dissolved into a shower of silver light that drifted peacefully into the night sky. Silence returned. Thomas remained standing until dawn. When the first sunlight appeared, the crystal lantern slowly dimmed. Its silver glow faded until it became an ordinary lantern once more. Thomas carefully carried it back to the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse. He placed it beside the journal of Edmund Hale. Then he closed the oak chest. The lock clicked softly by itself. He smiled. Some treasures were never meant to leave their resting place. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew older. His steps became slower. His hands shook as he climbed the spiral staircase each evening. Yet he never failed to light the beacon. Not once. Winter storms came and went. Ships crossed the northern sea. Children in the nearby village became parents. Parents became grandparents. Generations changed. But every evening, the warm light of Blackstone Lighthouse shone faithfully across the water. The villagers often wondered why Thomas smiled whenever he looked toward the sea. He never explained. Some mysteries become smaller when spoken aloud. Others become greater when quietly protected. Then, one peaceful autumn evening, many years later, Thomas felt unusually tired. He prepared the lighthouse as always. He polished the great glass lens. He trimmed the wick. He filled the lamp with fresh oil. Finally, he lit the beacon. The familiar golden light spread across the dark sea one last time. Thomas carried his old journal to the balcony. He wrote a final entry. If another keeper should one day find these pages, remember this. Asterisk, never believe that kindness disappears. Asterisk, asterisk, every good deed leaves a light behind. Asterisk, asterisk, sometimes we see that light. Asterisk, asterisk, most of the time we do not. Asterisk, asterisk, but it is always there. Asterisk, asterisk, keep the beacon burning. Asterisk, asterisk, someone, somewhere is depending upon it. Asterisk. He closed the journal gently. Above him, countless stars filled the night sky. Far beyond the horizon, a single silver light appeared. Then another, and another. The silent fleet had returned. For the last time, the ships moved slowly toward Blackstone Lighthouse. The elderly captain stood once again upon the leading vessel. This time, he extended his hand. Thomas smiled peacefully. He closed his eyes for only a moment. When the villagers arrived the following morning, they found him sitting peacefully beside the lantern. His journal rested upon his lap. A gentle smile remained upon his face. The great beacon was still shining. Not a single ship had been lost during the night. The villagers buried Thomas on the hill overlooking the lighthouse, where he had spent nearly his entire life. A young lighthouse keeper soon took his place. On his very first evening, as he climbed the winding staircase, he noticed something unusual. Resting quietly beside the great lantern was an old brass compass. Its needle pointed toward the sea, exactly as it always had. No one knew where it had come from. The young keeper picked it up and smiled. Outside, the lighthouse beam stretched across the calm water. Far away, beyond the reach of ordinary eyes, tiny silver lights shimmered for only a moment before disappearing into the horizon. Perhaps they were only stars reflected upon the sea. Or perhaps the old lighthouse was still guiding travelers whose journeys had not yet been forgotten. Even now, if you visit the lonely cliffs where Blackstone Lighthouse is said to have once stood, local fishermen will sometimes tell you an old story. On quiet autumn nights, when the moon is full and the sea is calm, they say a warm golden light can still be seen shining far beyond the rocks. And if you look very carefully, You might glimpse silent ships with silver sails crossing the water without a sound. Whether the tale is history or legend, no one can truly say. But every lighthouse reminds us of something simple and timeless. Even the smallest light can guide someone safely through the darkest night. Now, the waves grow softer. The wind becomes gentle. The lighthouse stands peacefully beneath the stars. Its warm beacon turns slowly across the sleeping sea. The silver ships fade into the mist. The tide rises and falls with quiet rhythm. Allow your breathing to become slow and steady. Let the sound of the ocean carry every worry away. And as the last light disappears beyond the horizon, may your own journey tonight be calm, peaceful, and filled with gentle dreams. Good night.